I'm Henry Kissam, and over the past year, I participated in the Write Your Novel Springboard course. I chose to write a high fantasy full length novel. I got to about 20,000 words. My goal was 30,000. I didn't quite make it this year, but I do plan on continuing to work on my novel in the coming years. As I did choose to write a high fantasy novel, there's quite a bit of world building and development to get through before you can really get to the meat and potatoes of the story. So before we get started, and really dive into my text and my process, I'm going to break down and do my best to explain the world that I created. So the story takes place in a country called Durain. Durain's a ducal monarchy, actually, with 5 duchies, including the King's Duchy. The dukes are the last descendant of a man who you'll hear a lot about in my novel, whose name was Arain. Arain's very much a Christ-like figure to the citizens of Durain, and he actually died about 500 years before the start of my novel. The dukes and their immediate families all possess magical abilities, and those abilities are channeled through a marking of a white eye in their right palm. So it'd be right here. It's just like a tattoo almost of a glowing white eye. And all white eyes have the ability to create and manipulate light, but the power and how much they can do that really depends on natural aptitude alone. One of the main characters in my novel, actually, Ray Luciani, is the daughter of the current king, and she's the most powerful white eye alive. Arain was actually the first white eye, and he held off an invasion led by a man named Zacharias, who betrayed Arain. Zacharias was a really close friend of Arain, and Arain was the king of Durain at this time. But Zacharias betrayed Arain to the Toth, and the Toth are the northern neighbors of the country of Durain. They're very barbaric and warlike. And just as Arain was the first of the white eyes, Zacharias was the first of the red eyes. Red eyes are very similar to white eyes in how their powers are shown, except it's on their left palm and it's a red eye. Red eyes at the time of my story are sort of beaten down and prosecuted by the white eyes and the church. And that's because, just like Arain is a Christ-like figure who is worshipped, Zacharias is a Judas-like figure who everyone hates, right? He's sort of, he's the great betrayer. Red eyes are forced to live in hiding, knowing if they're revealed to the world, they will be, purified by the church, which, just means killed. Red eyes' powers are random. It's not like the white eyes where every white eye has the same power, just at different levels. Red eyes all have completely different powers. So it's really whatever I can think of, and I've had a lot of fun really exploring that. Right now I have 3 red eyes. So Sangui is sort of the main antagonist of this, and he's a red eye. And he has the ability to manipulate blood outside of the body. Mikarn, who's our protagonist, our main protagonist, is also a red eye, and he has the power to manipulate shadow and create shadow out of his hands. And then the last one I have so far is Davin. And Davin has heterochromatic eyes, and he has the power to make people completely forget he existed. It's a very interesting power, I think. I've had a lot of fun writing his character. All they remember is those mismatched eyes. That's all they remember of him when he leaves the room, when he's not right there next to them. So he's very slippery. He's hard to track down, and he sort of coordinates this rebellion with Sangui. Mikarn, the main protagonist, has a really, really tragic story that I'll get more into later. Right now, I'm just trying to focus on highlighting the constant battle between the red and the white. And now I'm going to read a passage from my novel, which is actually a conversation between Mikarn and his mother that takes place before Mikarn's transformation, that sort of highlights the common people's hatred and distaste of the red. Mikarn, I can't pretend to understand Arain's will. All I know is that reds have been nothing but a stain on this country. Not all of them, I'm sure, but every red I've ever seen or heard of has been a killer, thief, rapist, or worse. That sort of power corrupts the soul, Mikarn. If it weren't for the royal family and the other whites, the reds would have long ago taken the whole place over. Maybe Arain don't want us to purify him. Maybe we should seek to rehabilitate or help them in his name. But after what some of them have done, I find it hard to believe the world ain't a better place without the bastards. Besides, Arain himself purged the reds of his time, didn't he? Zacharias and his followers, all put to the sword. Yeah, but Zacharias and his followers killed Arain and then attempted to take over the country, right? That's a lot different than an innkeeper with a red mark on his hand that can boil water without starting a fire. Mikar and his mother both stood and began to clear the table, continuing their discussion as they worked. But Mikarn, what if one night a rowdy customer is disrespectful to his wife, maybe grabs his daughter as she walks past to refill an ale? When he turns that seemingly harmless talent against that patron, what happens? Just because he could doesn't mean he will. Besides, what if the innkeeper is a retired soldier or duelist and simply draws his sword? The White Eyes can kill with just as little effort. What makes them different? Mikarn grimaced when he saw his mom's eyes grow hard. He knew he'd overstepped. I like your curiosity and appreciate that it's your nature to question. There are certain things folks just shouldn't say. The white power is good, pure. The red power, tainted, evil. You weren't alive during the Red Revolt, so I guess I shouldn't be too mad at you for saying what you did. But boy, you can't even imagine what them Reds did to people. Whole villages like this one here, burnt down for no other reason than some red-eye freak was bored. I seen little boys kidnapped from their homes, forced to soldier for them Reds. You better be thanking Arain every night that it was Morwen who won that damn war and not Farius with his Red Revolt. The soul ain't able to handle that sort of power, Mike. Humans ain't meant to wield it. That power just corrupts. And you best not be repeating your earlier thoughts now, boy. You can get in a lot of trouble like that. Mikar knew he'd really gone too far because her accent was getting worse and worse, a sure sign that she was worked up. He didn't mean it like that, though. He'd heard the stories of the Red Revolt, and he knew what atrocities the Reds had committed in the name of freeing themselves from oppression. What he didn't know is why. Why did the Reds so often seem to terrorize and destroy? Unable to hold back his curiosity, Mikarn said, I didn't mean it like that, Ma. I just meant what's the difference between a White's power and a Red's? I can't rightly say, Mikarn, but I never heard of a White-Eye raping and pillaging. Do you know Reds can't make things with their vile magic? Anything they create disappears. White magic lasts forever if the user is powerful enough. Arain's Grove ain't no miracle of a Red, that's for sure. And what kind of magic can only be used to destroy and never to build? An evil one. So I'd like to take a little time now to talk about my process before we get into some other things in my text. So as you can probably tell already, my story is very archetypal, right? It's very, good versus evil, the hero's journey, that whole thing. And Mr. Bennett picked up on that, and out of the budget of the class, he bought me The Hero of a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell. And I read that, and I like to think it's influencing my work, right? Because that idea of the hero's journey has been something that's stuck with me since 5th grade when I first learned about it. Where it's any hero, right? In this case, Mikarn, for the most part, is in his normal life, his normal routine, until something happens that forces him out of it. And in my novel, that's actually the death of his mother. She's killed, and he figures out that he's a red eye when he kills the attackers that killed his mom. His powers awaken, and he attacks them. He's forced out into the world. He does his thing, right? And by the time he comes back, the most important part of the hero's journey is that he's either learned something or brought back with him something that will change his world for the better. So what's going to happen in my novel, right? The full plan. This is going to be super boiled down, so I don't spend an hour explaining it. But there's a revolt staged by Sangui, who I mentioned earlier as one of the Red Eyes. He gets Duke Renlow, one of the White Eyes, to fund this mission because Duke Renlow thinks it will make him king. So Duke Renlow has every White Eye killed, every other White Eye other than himself killed. Ray, the king's daughter, actually survives this, but no other White Eye does, including Duke Renlow, when Sangui actually kills Duke Renlow and sort of tricks him. Then Sangui attempts to implement his own government, right? And Mikarn is on this quest for vengeance for the death of his mother, which was a part of Sangui's ploy to sort of take over, was to sow chaos across the country by sending troops to towns and villages to completely kill everyone there. So when Mikarn learns of this, he meets up with Ray, who is staging her own revolt as the last White Eye and the rightful queen to sort of take over. So they meet up and they go through, a bunch of trials and end up on top, right? And then Mikarn is able to convince Ray to stop the hatred and the killing of Red Eyes, right? Because Ray was never completely on board with that in the first place, and the entire infrastructure of Durain is built around magic. And now that Ray is the only White Eye, the Red Eyes need to step in and fill that void. So that's sort of how it ends. That's how my novel's going to end, is with that. But there's the growing threat of the Toth on the border throughout my entire novel. There's going to be a lot of warnings, a lot of things about the Toth uniting, rising up, and nobody's going to take it seriously, right? There's bigger issues going on within the kingdom itself, so they're going to sort of ignore the Toth to the north. And that's because if you're writing high fantasy, it needs to be at least a trilogy, right? If you have any intention of selling or publishing, it needs to be at least a trilogy, because you spend so much time writing high fantasy, creating this world, creating characters, doing all that, trying to get people invested, that you can't stop at one book. It has to be at least a trilogy. So that's sort of setting up for the next one, in which the main threat will be the invading Toth, and then Ray and Mikarn will have to sort of repel the Toth. I've got a lot of really cool ideas I need to figure out how to implement. The most important thing is obviously to just keep writing. There's a lot of stuff I'm not going to get to touch on in this presentation just because of the time limit, but I'd also like to impart that this is there's a lot of violence in this, right? I don't think it's overly violent. I don't think that's the main focus, but it is about a revolt. It is about killing, all that. So if you have any other questions, there'll be plenty of time in the Q&A. We're really excited to hear any questions you guys have. I'm going to end the presentation with another reading from the text. This time it is when Ray is earning her Nameless, so it's essentially a bodyguard. So Ray's Nameless decides that in order to test Ray, she's going to fight Ray. And Ray has been holding back this whole time, trying to not severely hurt the girl, but she's getting her ass kicked, and she's on the ground, and the Nameless is talking down to her and really pissing her off. So I'm just gonna start. The Nameless stared dispassionately on at Ray's pitiful figure. This ends when you wanted to, princess. Admit you've lost and step out of the circle. Ray began to rise shakily to her feet, refusing to let the smug Nameless beat her. Immediately, the girl stepped forward, and her hand darted out like a snake, smashing into Ray's already broken nose. Her nose screamed out in agony, sending shockwaves through her entire body. She collapsed once again to the ground, but this time with a sense of finality. Her brain was begging her to let her body shut down, but Ray's heart refused to let her quit. The Nameless shook her head in disgust, bending down closer to Ray. You're weak. For all the magic supposedly in that body, you can't even touch me. You don't deserve to rule, princess. You don't deserve the gifts you've been given. Ray struggled to control the rage building up within her, but she failed. The magic burned with fury, thrashing against Ray's mental bonds. All at once, the bonds snapped, and the hot magic flew through her. It came forward like a great wave, blowing any idea of restraint and caution out of her mind. Ray closed her right hand into a fist, and finally let the tiger loose. The magic howled with glee, rushing out of her like water from a burst dam. Golden chains appeared around the Nameless, holding her fast as Ray once again rose to her feet. I don't deserve it, she croaked with a strained voice. Let me show you what I've earned. 16 years of practicing restraint and control, all to prepare me for a monarch's life. I'm sick of holding back and pretending to be less than I am. Let's see what I can do if I just forget those lessons. Let's see what I can do if I just lose control. With that, she looked down at her palm, the wide eye shining brightly through her blood-stained hands. The Nameless struggled desperately against her chains, and her eyes filled with fear as Ray held up her hand. The eye's light grew and grew as Ray focused as much magic as she could into her palm. It felt as if Ray was holding her hand against a hot iron, and when she could take the heat no longer, she looked up at the Nameless. Ray's lip curled into a snarl as she growled at the chained girl. Get out of my circle. Ray splayed out her fingers and pushed, and 1,000 different shades of white exploded in a sudden burst with Ray at the epicenter. The chain shattered as the Nameless shot towards the wall. She slammed into the wall, bouncing off and coming to an awkward rest on the ground. She lay unmoving, and for a second Ray thought she'd killed her. She was relieved when she saw the rise and fall of her chest, and thanked Rain for his mercy. Thank you all for listening to my presentation. I hope you have some questions for me in the Q&A. Thank you.